I'd like to talk about the Madhyamaka Sutta, very like a kind of classic Majjhima Nikaya Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 18. It's a kind of classic. I think what I find quite striking and beautiful about many of the suttas is not just the teaching, which is one aspect of it, but also the setting. There's a sort of storyline going on behind it. Sometimes, as in this case, it's put in quite a brief way, and there's this little story going behind it, which is quite enchanting and interesting in its own way. So the sutta begins in the great wood in Kapilavatthu. Kapilavatthu was where the Buddha was raised. His father was called, what's his name? Suddhodana. His family came from this Devadaha close by to Kapilavatthu. Suddhodana came from a large family, and the Buddha's mother came from number of 4 children. She was number whatever it was. We'll come to that. But the Great Wood was a very large wood stretching from Kapilavatthu right up to the Himalaya mountains at that time. And the Buddha had gone there to sit at the root of what they call a bilva sapling. For some reason, I don't know why that had to be included, but there he was. And this man called Dandapani, the Sakyan, was apparently walking for exercise, and thank you. And approached the Buddha and stood at one side leaning on his walking stick. His walking stick I think he was quite fond of, actually, my feeling from the story. It's very brief, and he asked the Buddha, what is the ascetic's doctrine, what does he proclaim? Kimwadi Samano. Samano is sometimes the Buddha's title, Kimmakayati. And that seems innocent enough, doesn't it? That this Dandapani should come up to him and stand there leaning on his stick and ask him, what does the samana, what's the ascetic's doctrine, what does he proclaim? That seems nothing too mischievous or problematic there, or is there? But you remember, maybe you know this, you're probably brought, but for Westerners we're not maybe familiar, but Dandapani was in fact the Buddha's uncle. So it wasn't like they didn't know each other, and it's also very unlikely that Dandapani did not know what the Buddha taught, because the Buddha came from this Sakyan clan who were renowned for their sort of, how could you call it, slight stubbornness actually, to the extent that the Buddha on his first visit to Kapilavatthu had to do the twin miracle to get them to pay attention. They would not pay attention to his teaching because he was such a young man. And in this case also the Buddha will have been, maybe under 40, and Dandapani will have been 70 or 80 probably, and his uncle. And so he asked this rather abrupt question, standing there, and the Buddha, and I think in the Buddha's answer it becomes, usually when the Buddha answers questions, he answers it in a very kind of appropriate way according to the personality of the person. And so he replied, such a doctrine, friend, that in the world with its devas, maras and brahmas, in this world of mankind with its ascetics and brahmins, its princes and people, one does not abide quarrelling with anyone in the world. So from that, I would assume that Dandapani had actually deliberately set out to find the Buddha in the Great Wood, and he wanted to know what the Buddha's doctrine was so that he could quarrel with it. And the Buddha stopped it like that. One does not abide quarrelling with anyone in the world. Such a doctrine that, for the Arahant who abides detached from sense pleasure, free of perplexity, with remorse cut off free of hopes and wishes for any kind of existence. Fictitious inner perceptions no longer persist in him. This is my doctrine, this is what I proclaim. So Dandapani, having shaken his head, waggled his tongue, raised his forehead so it had 3 wrinkles, departed leaning on his stick. And that's the last we hear of Dandapani. He's never mentioned again in the suttas. That's the end of him, and no answer at all. No ability to come or respond or ask. No particular respect for the Buddha, and really wonder whether he learned. He was luckier, incidentally, than some of the Buddha's relatives. Dandapani's brother, which Mahamaya was the Buddha's mother, right, and his aunt was called Mahapajapati. So then those 2 later women had 2 brothers, and one was Dandapani and the other one was, do you know this? Super Buddha. You think, like with a name like Super Buddha, you think he would be a Buddhist, wouldn't you? And Super Buddha must be Super Buddhist. But he wasn't a Buddhist. Super Buddha hated the Buddha, and he was a drunkard and alcoholic, and he hated the Buddha to the extent that he was the one. In fact, the Buddha had 2 close relatives who came to an extremely unfortunate end, and Super Buddha was one. Super Buddha was swallowed up by the earth and went straight to hell, and so did his son, and his son was Devadatta. So that's 2 close members of the Buddha's family. A very unfortunate end. Very interesting, his family was not all angels at all. So a lot were, like a lot of the Buddha's relatives were extremely accomplished and incredible people. Like his wife, who's got something, I've forgotten her name now actually. What's her name? Come to it. Anyway, his wife very accomplished, and also Mahapajapati and so on. Anyway, that's the family. So that was Dandapani, and he was stopped in his attempt to quarrel with the Buddha with this very kind of intriguing reply. And so the Buddha spent the rest of the day in the Great Wood, and then he went back to Nigroda's monastery. Nigroda monastery, I think, was near Kapilavatthu, outside, and was, I think, given to the Buddha even on his first visit there, and that's where he was staying. And he explained the monks about this. He told them this story, and then a monk asked him, but what is this doctrine, such that one does not abide quarrelling with anyone in the world? And how is it that these, now remember this term, it's my explanation, how is it that fictitious inner perceptions no longer obsess the Arahant? This word, here it's the word sanya, but I think the word sanya relates to this word papancha, and so I'll have to explain the translation of that. I'll do it a bit later. Do you know what word fictitious means? It means false. Fictitious is like false, it's like fiction. Like a fiction, you read fiction. Inner perceptions. It's not your perceptions with your eyes and ears, but your inner perceptions, your inner thoughts. And this is what the Madhupindika Sutta is about primarily. It's about how to deal skillfully with our thoughts. If your thoughts, can be very harmful, a very harmful effect, as we're going to find out in the next explanation. This is how the Buddha answered to this monk. The monk asked, what is this doctrine, such that one does not abide quarrelling with anyone in the world, and how is it that fictitious inner perceptions no longer obsess the Arahant? The word obsess is anusenti, it's that word, slightly different meaning, anusya, it's the same word, it's different translation, no longer obsess him. And the inner perceptions, how is it? Like, it might ask you, do you find your mind gets obsessed with certain thoughts, certain memories of people, certain ideas and so on, and do you know how to deal with them? And you see the danger in them even. Like, these perceptions can drive people to madness, can't they? And can drive them to violence, and can drive them to breaking precepts, and many very big problems. And so it's a subtle aspect, but very important. And this is what we'll try and explain a little bit today. The Buddha's answer was this: whatever the source of the fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions, I'll say this twice here, whatever the source of the fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions, if there is, that occur in a man, if there is found nothing there to be enjoyed, welcomed, or taken hold of, this ends the tendency to lust, this ends the tendency to hatred, this ends the tendency to false insights, this ends the tendency to perplexity, this ends the tendency to presume a me, this ends the tendency to attach to existence, this ends the tendency to Dhamma blindness, this ends the use of sticks and swords, quarrels, arguments, disputes, strife, and malicious and false speech. It does not end that bell. This is quite a profound, and like to explain it to you. I sympathise in some ways that on a first reading, maybe some of you read it, but it must be maybe difficult. But remember, tomorrow evening we can talk about it again at the Narada Centre. You come over and you get a sheet, and you can read it as well as listen to me. But I'll have to try and explain a little bit to you. This word, papancha, maybe I could explain it like this. If you look carefully in the Madhupindaka Sutta, you can see, hard to explain it exactly now because it's a little bit hurried, but let me put it. The word papancha papancheti, is very close to the word sanjanati perception, say. Sorry, say that again. It's very close to the word to vitaketi. Yam vitaketi tam pampacheti, that's what it says in the sutta. That which he thinks about, he papanchas something, right? It's related. And that which he papanchas is the source of these fictitious inner perceptions. That's one list in the sutta. But elsewhere in the sutta, it says that what one thinks about, vitaketi, is the source of the of these fictitious inner perceptions. It's as if to say that vitaketi and papancheti are actually very close and almost the same thing. So that when I thought about it, I thought, like, how do you translate, what could the word papancheti mean if it's so close to thought? I felt it was close to the word imagine. It's when you think about something, you already start to imagine it. You're thinking about a problem at work, you're already kind of imagining your work. I've got this person creating trouble, da-da-da-da. And that person in your head is like in imagining, you understand? So it's in that sense the word papancheti is quite close to vitaketi. I didn't like the word imagine because it's a bit fuzzy in a way. It's like almost you can kind of create, like artists imagine something in a way that I didn't want that word particularly. But it's not that bad. But the word fictitious becomes more close and sort of more accurately what I think the word means. It's to do with fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions. The word sanya I've taken as perception. The word sankha is very close to the word sanya. It's almost like, in this instance, it's like a synonym. So you want, if you should translate it, just to try to slightly justify what I've done, perceptions and conceptions, very close. So this is what we're talking about. It's like the thought. And the Buddha says, with these fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions, if there is found nothing there to be enjoyed, taken hold of, then that's the end of these tendencies in the mind, which are very harmful tendencies. And where one does not enjoy, welcome, or take hold of them, then all these harmful, unskillful states are destroyed without remainder. And I suppose we should remember that in a way, the first little passage I read was related to the Arahant, to the Brahmin. So it's quite a high teaching in a way. In a way, you could say this is the practice of an Arahant. But that I think it's also in a way, in some ways, it's practice for all of us in a way, just to think about it. Now, for me, when I look at this sutta, like when the Buddha gave discourses, some of the things he said, he himself said, needed a further explanation. Sometimes he would give things in a slightly summarized forms and they needed a further explanation. I think in this case, actually, when I look at this is a complete teaching, and you can explain it, you can say more about it, and I will try to do more, just to try and maybe help in a way. But I think the key to what maybe, and the most important thing we'll try and say today is found in this teaching. And it's to do with this word enjoyed, welcome, or taken hold of. Eta nati abhinan, eta chanati. That if in this case, nati is not. If there is found nothing here, there, to be enjoyed, abhinanditabang, abhiwaditabang, ajositabang. These are these interesting grammatical structures. We'll talk about it tomorrow evening if you come. These are called future something or other. Anyway, it's a case. There's nothing that should not be enjoyed, welcome, or taken hold of. For me, I think perhaps this could be summarized with the phrase engaged with. If whatever the source, it's like the Buddha disregards whatever the source of it is of them. If there is found nothing there to engage with, then that is the end of these harmful tendencies in the mind, the full range of the tendencies. And this is not an analytical teaching. I think what's so striking about this sutta is, in many instances, the Buddha stresses like the contemplation of impermanence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, that kind of angle, a kind of contemplative in that way. I think in this case it's not an analytical teaching at all. It's a straight practice of not engaging with these fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions. I think the best way to think about this is to think of thought as energy. Thought is energy. Your memories, like each memory, is like energy. And there are certain thoughts, if you think about them, you add energy to them. Understand? And my impression from this is the Buddha is saying that if there is found nothing there to engage with, this ends these harmful tendencies. I think thought in general has a tendency to attract, doesn't it? Like if you have some suffering or some pain, very often, or some new love affair, say. I mean, this is like the whole range, either pleasant or painful. Thought often can be very attractive and want to pull more energy in, doesn't it? You must think about it more and more, that person. Very often this is to do with people, isn't it? Like the perplexing and troublesome things in our life are the people. And the images and these fictitious perceptions. We have like even false perceptions about people. I mean, they're false in the sense that I will come to. Why are these false, the perceptions and conceptions? And the human tendency is to think about these problems as a method to solve it. We have a problem, you're my enemy, now I'm going to think about you and try and solve the problem by thinking. And the problem is, all the time that I'm thinking about it, I'm adding energy to the problem. You understand? And this problem, if I continue like this, I'm adding energy to my thoughts, and I'm, in the end, battling with my own energy. I'm battling with myself. Because the thought, the Buddha, as we'll come to, the thought is generated, it is energized by myself, by my own thoughts. I'm adding energy to the thought, and then fighting that thought with more energy. And so the problem continues, you understand? And this can continue for years. And not only does it continue, but it also continues some very unskillful attitudes also. It can draw me in to perceiving and acting mentally or behaving mentally with this in very unskillful ways, can't I? With aggression or lust or confusion or opinions and all of that. All of that coming from not understanding the escape from it, which the Buddha is saying here. The escape from this is if there is nothing there to be engaged with. And that means, in brief, what, as I understand it, is to have the ability to perceive the inner perceptions and conceptions without adding thought to them. You understand that? This is the key. All I want to say, main thing I want to say today, that's it. And I'll go around it and talk about different aspects or different ways of doing this. But the fact is, as I see this, as I read it, it's a way of looking at thought and memories and all the passions and hatreds you might feel in your mind and not adding any more energy to them. Because if you do, that will go on and on and on and on, and you will never come to the end of it. You will add and fight, and there will be no end to it. You can even analyze it. You can analyze thought. The problem, as I see, of any form of analysis of the problem is that you all the time adding more energy to it. You're not looking at it, you're adding energy to it and thinking that person's impermanent, anicca, dukkha, anatta, analyzing, but all the time adding your energy to it. You understand? You are engaged with it through analysis. You hope maybe I could analyze the problem, and all the time energy is pouring in and exhausting you and dragging you into all kinds of aggressive or lustful attitudes, all of it akusala, and that's all akusala karma that's been created, and it's all fictitious, it's all your mind in a sense, it's all fiction. It's the monk's question, how is it that these fictitious inner perceptions no longer obsess the Arahant? Obsess him. How do you end the obsession with thought? Is through observing the thought. That's what I'm proposing, and you can argue with me tomorrow, but today you can't do it today. But you could remember that. So, very profound teaching, and the monks were. And then the Buddha explained this very briefly to him and said that in these ways these harmful, unskillful states are destroyed without remainder. And then Venerable the monks went to Venerable Mahakachana. The Buddha went back into his kuti, into his hut, and they asked Venerable Mahakachana to explain it, and he was perplexed about it. He said to them, as a man might think that the heartwood of a great tree is to be found in the branches and leaves, so you, friends, think that I should be asked about the meaning of this discourse. Having had the teacher face to face, having ignored that sublime one, you judge that I should be asked about the meaning of this discourse. But, Venerables, that was the time when you should have questioned the Sublime One about the meaning. For the Sublime One knows what should be known and sees what should be seen. He is vision, he is knowledge, he is truth, he is Brahma, he is the teacher, the guide, the revealer of meaning, the giver of the deathless, the Lord of truth, the Tathagata. So the monks persisted and said to Venerable Mahakachana that yet the Venerable Mahakachana is praised by the teacher and esteemed by his wise companions in the holy life. Let the Venerable Mahakachana explain and not find it troublesome. So then Venerable Mahakachana said, then listen, pay close attention and I will speak. And he did not say, I will explain. It's very clever, very exact use of his words. He was very reluctant to get drawn into having to do this, but he went that far. I will speak. And what he explained was how these inner fictitious perceptions arise in man, and he explained that they arise because of the senses. And he didn't. That was really all he explained. He explained one section of it, how they arise, and he said, because of the senses, the eye and forms, then this vijnana, sometimes called consciousness. Can't explain that now. Because of eye forms consciousness, then the contact arises. You get sense contact. Because of sense contact, there's sensation. With sensation, there's perception. With perception, there is thought. With thought, then these fictitious perceptions are formed. Yang vitaketi kampa pancheti. And the formation of the fictitious perceptions is the source of the fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions that occur to man in relation to past, future and present forms made known through the eye. So it's a kind of mechanism. It's the mechanism of how the thoughts are formed. They're formed through our senses, through the operation of perception, Vedana, sensation, perception, and then perception leads to thought, and thought leads to the formation of fictitious perceptions, very close to sanya. You can see how those terms all get very, very close: perception, thought, and then fictitious perceptions, and from there the inner perceptions and conceptions that occur to man occur. And that's basically his explanation. He explains it in different ways, and he explains according to all the senses, including the mind, with the mind and mental objects. Quite complicated, really, complicated list. And from that you can see how these things can go round and round, because these fictitious perceptions are also mental objects, aren't they? And then in the mind you can think about them again, and then that changes them, and all the time that's not ending them. But the aspect, what you notice in that explanation is that Venerable Mahakachana does not talk about the ending of them in any way. He's talking about the cause of how they're formed, and he also says it's more like in terms of those causal principles. He doesn't really even explain how not to form them. He doesn't. In fact, even the Buddha doesn't explain that. He doesn't say how not to form them. What the Buddha seems to stress is how they should cease. That's the sort of cessation of them. Talking about cessation. This word papancha, I've got time to do this. Just try and explain this quickly to you. It occurs in other sort of sections of the Sutta Pitaka. The monks, monk Venerable Mahapotita asked Venerable Sariputta about Nibbana, and the Buddha and Venerable Sariputta explained that as a papancha, as a sort of asking about Nibbana is kind of creating is it like a fictitious perception? You know, thinking about Nibbana, it's the same word. That word papancha is a fictitious perception. So, understanding that word, you can see it a bit from that quotation, which is on this sheet. Might give a copy to you at the end of this explanation. And also the other word, the other place it occurs, the word papancha occurs where the I am is called a fictitious perception. I am asmi in Pali, as me, I am, bhikkhave papancha, papanchita metam. So this papancha, I am, it's fictitious. And it's certainly in Buddhism, I think you will realise the I am it's falsehood. It's a fictitious perception. I am this, I will be, I will not be. That's all fictitious. That's the word, this fictitious perception. And so similarly, it's not just I. How about you? You are this. You will be. He is. She is. They are. We are. That's all the same. It's the same, isn't it? It's all these fictitious perceptions that can obsess the ordinary human being, and then all that obsession is the reason that people abide quarrelling with anyone in the world, and that's indeed the reason that Dandapani the Sakyan, walking for exercise, would go and stand leaning on his walking stick and want to argue with the Buddha. Why? Because he wants an argument. He's got this obsession in his mind about the Buddha, and he wants to sort it out. He wants to quarrel. It's like how do you solve this perception? You're irritated by your young nephew, claims to be a Buddha, making all kinds of statements. You get fed up, and you say, I will go and sort him out with my walking stick. I will go and find out where he is, and I will sort out the problem. And that's how you do it. And indeed, that's how most people do it. Sometimes they do it with a sword or a gun. We will sort out the problem. Something like that. But it's always not the way to do it. This is not the way to solve these perceptions by arguing with people. I've noticed actually, not this like talking about energy, adding energy to thought. I don't know whether you follow this or not. But you can even, if you'd like to try it, if maybe you can't follow your inner arguments, but how about following the outer arguments? Sometimes if you have an argument with someone in the past, and then you go and talk to them about that argument a year later, you should try it. You see, remember that argument you had, and you said that. Yes, but you said that, and I said that. Yes, but you said that. You see, now it's the same idea here. You've got an argument which is long distant, and now you start to add energy to it. You understand? It's the same principle. It's like not allowing something to cease, is what I'm saying. This is the thing. I suppose people can't believe that if you leave something alone, it's impermanent, it fades away, you see. And they think, well, I've got to make it fade away by having an argument with it. And you can do it with yourself in a way, yes, but they said that, yes, but then I said that. And internally, all the time adding energy and keeping these terrible fictitious perceptions alive and growing. And then that can lead to all kinds of unskillful behaviour. Or you can do it externally with people. You go up to them and have another argument, another discussion about who was right. Was I right or were you right? Well, I think I was right and you made another mistake, like that. Yes, no, and that's all. And all of that, I'm saying look at that as energy. And it's not peaceful. This is not the way to peace, actually, adding energy. I can't say you shouldn't have arguments. I mean, because I don't think that's the message of this. It's more, the message, I think, is to examine the way that you use your energy and choose how to use it. And I think when you're aware of it, then you will be more capable of knowing when the right time is to engage and when not to engage. But in general, I think humans engage too much. And I think the reason we engage is because this is never explained to anybody. How obsessions grow and develop in the mind. You understand? It's only when someone is absolutely raving mad we say they're mad. You are mad, you need medicine. You need to go to hospital. And that's true, they are mad, but there's a lot of people like that on the same, it's slightly lower down, maybe not so obvious, but this sort of obsession is the sort of human illness that goes on. And and I think we all would benefit from openly examining it and actually finding what the proper solution is. And this, I feel, is the Buddhist solution, is to allowing the thing to cease without adding energy to it. It takes a certain amount of trust, because the habit is always to engage with thought. But to trust this actually ability to observe thought, and quite difficult, actually. What is it that, can I mention, I'll race forward on these sheets, but what is it, do you think, that is so difficult about the practice of observing thought without adding any energy to it? The difficult aspect of thought is the feeling aspect of it. It has a certain feeling, has a certain vedana. Usually, following this, thoughts, if you have an image, use the word image now. I could talk about fictitious perceptions, or I could use the word image. Take the word image. Usually an image has many components, doesn't it? It's got a physical, like a visual component. You can remember the person's face, you can remember their speech, and also there's a sort of feeling. Can you follow this? A feeling in your body. You get a feeling if you remember someone. Doesn't only happen when you remember actually, it's also when you see someone. Like when you see me or I see you here and now, there's a visual component, you can look at me, but there's also a kind of emotional component too. There's a sort of feeling component. And my impression is that humans muddle everything together. Everything gets mixed together. The visual, feeling, all of it, and all of that is you. I then say that's you. And I might even blame you for it. I'd like to blame you for being the way you are. But in reality that's somewhat unfair because it's all coming from, it's actually all from my senses. It's all, I could blame you I guess, but it's somehow Dhamma is more, it's not quite that simple because you can't exist separately from me, can you? I mean, to me, like if my senses were not existent, you couldn't exist at all, could you? From my perspective. So I think to blame you in a way is slightly unfair because it leaves, it's as if to say I'm the sort of ultimate arbiter of who's good and who's bad, as if I somehow not actually, somehow my senses haven't created the whole thing anyway. It's complicated. This sort of blame element is not very helpful to understand the problem. So my impression is, like if I, and I'm going to skip forward a little bit, I'll give you these sheets, any of you who take them, but this Bahir Sutta, I think in some way answers this. It's one explanation. Look, either you can do this directly, either, you see, this sutta, I think in some ways is a complete teaching. If there's nothing found there to engage with, this is the end of many, many unwholesome, harmful tendencies. Just not engaging with thought. That is observing and not engaging. Understand? Can you do that? Observing, not engaging. That's one explanation. Another explanation, might be helpful, is this, I think, explanation of Bahir. The Bahir Sutta, I think, also another sutta that I think needs, well, we'll think about it. But Bahir was this incredible ascetic living by the seashore who actually thought he was an arahant. He thought, goodness, I must be an arahant. And then his relative, Devata, came to him and said, you're not an arahant. Not only are you not an arahant, Bahir, you're not even on the path to arahantship. And Bahir did not get indignant and say, how dare you tell me that? He didn't. He said, he said something like, what should I do? And then his lovely Devata relative said, well, you should go to this monk in Savatthi and talk to him and he can help you. So that's what Bahir did. He went straight to Savatthi and asked the Buddha on Amjan. He didn't wait. He said, tell me, something. I can't remember the exact question he said, but the Buddha gave him the teaching, and Bahir immediately understood. He was arahant immediately, standing there in front of the Buddha on Amjan, arahantship immediately. So he was the fastest. He was the fastest in the book, faster than Venerable Sariputta, faster than Venerable Moggallana. He was the fastest, Bahir. So now would you like to know what the Buddha said? Maybe. So what the Buddha said was here in Bahir, standing there on Amjan. This was shortly before Bahir was killed, incidentally. He was killed very shortly after this by a cow. And the lay people, nobody knew who this man was, and they threw his body on the rubbish tip, I think. They just said, the dead man, throw him away. That's what you did in those days. And the Buddha said to the monks that, he said, you should go and erect a shrine, that is your brother in the holy life. So the Buddha obviously understood and explained to the monks that this human being understood. And what he understood was this explanation. Here in Bahir, you should train yourself thus. In the seen there will be merely what is seen. In the heard there will be merely what is heard. In the sense there will be merely what is sensed. In the cognized there will be merely what is cognized. when this is accomplished, then you will not be on account of anything. When you are not on account of anything, you will not be in any place. When you are not in any place, then you will be neither here nor there nor anywhere between the two. Just this is the end of suffering. I guess you think what you see, what you hear, that's what you hear, and it's this, it's not creating a self around it. What you feel, sense is usually the body, or the body. Say, let's take it to the body. It includes the sort of nose and the tongue, the sense, but it's, I think, mainly the body that's the emphasis there, and recognized as the mind. My feeling is that and I think maybe an interesting aspect of this is how muddled our sensation is really, like how everything muddles together in a sense. How, like, even though you see someone, very often the feelings are there too. It's not just their voice, but there's a sort of feeling you have about people also, and that's the sensed aspect. It's the visual aspect. It's the heard aspect. It's the sensed aspect. And in vision, there is so much that is sensed. Actually, it's not. I don't know that you can immediately see this, but I encourage you to consider it. And I think not only in the external eye, but I think in the inner senses, in thought, it's the same. In that within thought, it's the same principle occurs, that we have different sensations and they all get lumped together. And my feeling, what the Buddha is saying here, some people may disagree, but with thought, it has a visual component, it has an auditory component, and it has a sense component. And as I read it, the Buddha's explanation here is to see these elements as separate, to see the seen aspect of thought as the seen, to see the heard aspect as the heard, to know, to say see or know, to realize the felt aspect is the felt aspect. And you can, like your mother, say take your mother, there's a visual aspect. You can remember her face, you can remember her speech, what she said, and so on. That's the visual aspect. In the seen will be merely what is seen. You see that? It's separating. In the heard, what is heard, and what is sensed is sensed. And like with all being, not just your mother, the mother, there's a lot of sensation, and it's a physical sensation. I mean, the sensation in memory and thought, actually, there's a sensation in the body. It's all, like the body, it's not, like the mind, I think, is not purely in the head. Very often emotions are subtle. It's subtle, but I think it's the body also. It's included. And I think my feeling with this sutta is to see these independent components as independent components. And it's doing it like this gives you the ability to cope with thought. Because if the aspects of thought are all muddled together, it becomes very difficult to see the truth of thought, because it's such a muddle, especially the feeling aspect. When the feeling aspect is muddled with the visual aspect, it all becomes very impossible. Where seeing the different components is a way of seeing actually what is not self, in a way. By dividing it and seeing the individual components, actually the problem is not at all what we imagine it to be. So my feeling, like to understand the Madhupindika Sutta, if there is nothing found to engage with, and it's talking about whatever the source of the fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions, if there is found nothing there to engage with, this is the end of the tendency, you see. The tendency depends on the wrong appreciation of thought. You need, like, the habit is to engage with these perceptions in a certain way, and that habit keeps the unskillful tendencies alive. And now we are trying to see these perceptions which have been formed as without engaging with them, to see without engaging. Or do do you think of that? Do you think that would be easy? What do you think of this? How long do you think this will take? Is this like something you do in the afternoon, in the weekend retreat? How long have we been forming these conceptions of people? How long has thought? How many thoughts have we had? How many of these fictitious conceptions? Fictitious means I am, you are. That's fictitious, isn't it? Fictitious, it's not. It's got. You won't find this thing. It's not to be found, but it's to be assumed. We assume it, and then we struggle with it. You are this, and even having heard this, even vitaketi, it's like, the problem almost continues. It's like even perception itself is so filled with these fictions. The fiction continue even within perception itself. All the time, these fictitious concepts are formed continually, and have been for years and years and years. And so when you sit, my feeling is, to pursue the work, to begin the work of examining this, and not adding energy to the fiction, not adding energy to the conceptions, to the perceptions. Examining and not acknowledging perception. It's not suppressing it or denying it or stopping it in any way, but seeing it for what it is, seeing this for what it is. And secondly, to see that if you engage with it, you add energy to it. That's what you do. And how you do that is slightly for you to find out. How can you change the habit of engaging with it? How do you do that? How can you change the habit? This is meditation. This is what I was told. You had to meditate today. So you're very exhausted after a day's work, and you must meditate. But if we did meditate, how would you do it? Let me explain Sakha. I've got a few more minutes before. I think the question that was asked, interesting, is in the Digha Nikaya. I feel Sakha, the king of the gods, asked a good question about this. It's the same word actually occurs in this sutta, and I'll give you a brief extract just to tell you that yes, I think this is a good question. The problem is that the monks, I felt, they asked Venerable Mahakachana, and Mahakachana was slightly reluctant to answer, and he answered in a certain way. Sakha, king of the gods, came to the Buddha and asked this question. He asked a series of questions in the Digha Nikaya actually, but this was one of them. What is the practice leading to the cessation of fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions? Very good question. And the Buddha's answer was, I think, it was brilliant, really, in that it was comprehensive. It was, I think it's maybe also very. Let me tell you what it is. This is in brief. This is briefly what he said. Happiness, somanasa, sorrow, domanasa, and neutrality, upekkha, are each of two types. A type that should be cultivated and a type that should not. Sevitabhampi, asevitabhampi. Happiness, sorrow, and neutrality are each of two types. That's a happiness that should be cultivated and a happiness that should not. A sorrow that should be cultivated and a sorrow that should not. A neutrality that should be cultivated and a neutrality that should not. When one knows of any happiness, sorrow, or neutrality that in cultivating it unwholesome states increase and wholesome states decline, it should not be pursued. If cultivating it wholesome states increase and unwholesome states decline, it should be pursued. This practice leads to the cessation of fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions. So what does that mean? It means to cultivate what is kusala, to abandon what is akusala. And by doing that, these fictitious inner conceptions, this is the cessation of the fictitious inner perceptions and conceptions. It's a very different answer from what you might, it's not logically following, but in a sense what that does is to encapsulate, in a brief phrase, it encapsulates the Eightfold Path. It's saying, it's if, I think the slight problem with the Madhupindaka Sutta, sometimes you might think that it's some little, like a technique you must have, of not enjoying, welcoming or taking hold of these conceptions, fictitious conceptions, and that's the end of the problem. It's in a way that's, yes, that's true, but another way of putting it is to follow the Eightfold Path. That is the end of it. In that it's not, it needs, there are many aspects to answering the question, that Sakka's question, there are many aspects to it. And the way the Buddha was answering it in these terms of developing what's wholesome, wholesome happiness, wholesome unhappiness, and wholesome neutrality. And not developing unwholesome happiness, not developing unwholesome sorrow, and not developing unwholesome neutrality. Okay, so now we have three answers, all right, to this question. I'm trying to, it's a lot for you, isn't it? But we have the Buddha's answer, the first answer, if there is found nothing there to engage with, that's the end of the problem. Then you have Bahir, in the scene will be the scene, that's the second way of answering it, slightly different way. The Sakka's way of answering it is to develop, cultivate what's wholesome, not to abandon and abandon what's unwholesome. That's another way of looking at it. All very brilliant ways. Very brilliant. And I would like to tell you a fourth way that I thought might help you. You might like this. It's in the Anguttara Nikaya. It's something called the Four Brahman Truths. Four Brahman Truths. You've also yet heard of the Four Noble Truths? These are the Four Brahman Truths. Spoken by the Buddha, not the Brahman. Spoken by the Buddha. And he can't remember the introduction. The introduction to it is very brief, but he says, I will explain these Brahman truths to you, something like that. And in fact, the four Brahman truths are made up of various components. So if you expand the components, actually there are actually nine Brahman truths, if you would like. And I'm not sure how far I will tell you on this list. See how you get on. I'll explain them to you. The first one is this. Sabbe panna avajjati. 3 words. All beings must not be harmed. All beings must not be harmed. And in saying this, the monk, the Brahmin, speaks truth, not falsehood. He presumes not manyati, he presumes not I am superior, I am equal, I am inferior. These are the manyati, the papancha. Manyati is quite close to papancha if you see that. It's like if I think I'm better than you, that's papancha. It's also manyati, isn't it? But if I think the thought all beings must not be harmed, that's very different, isn't it? It's very different from thinking I'm better than you. I'm thinking very different. I'm thinking the Brahman truth. It's a completely different way of using thought. You understand? It's a way of using energy in a very different way, isn't it? Like if I sit at home and think I'm a better meditator than you, I can sit longer than you. My mind's more peaceful than you. I'm better than you in every way. That's all papancha, isn't it? And it's all adding energy to you, to some thought papancha I have of you and all of that. And that's adding, and it's not subtracting at all. Whereas if I had the thought I'm jealous of you and I must think I'm better than you and all of that, but just examine that without adding energy to it, that would be the first way. Or Bahir's way would be to have the image of you, the feeling I have around you, to see that without mixing them and seeing them without adding to them. That's the Bahir way. The Sakha's way is to, can't think of anything immediately, akusala. But this way, I feel, it's the use of human energy, the energy of the mental energy, in a very skillful way. It's not to think about problems or thoughts in that way at all, but to think all beings must not be harmed is an incredible thought, isn't it? You might not realise this. But you should practice. Try practicing with that. I recommend it. And I might tell you the others. You're meditating. If you meditate now, I don't get blamed for not having you meditate for half an hour. See, we started late. Better not. Okay. Now, in saying this, not only do you speak truth and not falsehood, that's already kusala, isn't it? That's already kusala, to think truth and not falsehood. If I think I'm better than you, there's a slight falsehood there. So that's already slightly akusala. That's not following the advice given to Sakha. But if I think all beings must not be harmed, that's a kusala vitaka, isn't it? Kusala. And I'm not even manyati. There's not even manyati, and there's no papanchati there at all. But I'm using all the time, at that time, my thought is skillful, isn't it? So you've got to admit that's good. At that time, I'm not thinking an akusala thought. So that's praiseworthy, isn't it? And not only that, it actually helps you and me and all beings, doesn't it? To think that thought has a very incredible effect. Like, say I was jealous of you and think I've got to find a way of showing you that I'm better than you, that's harmful, isn't it? So if I thought all beings must not be harmed, I'm jealous of you, right? But I don't think how am I going to get the better of you. I think all beings must not be harmed. That has an effect on the way I regard you, does it not? I'm jealous of you, all beings must not be harmed. All beings must not, that has an effect, doesn't it? It affects the way I think about you, and it affects my relationship to you, isn't it? And all the time I am accruing, like haven't talked about punya much, merit, but it's meritorious, isn't it? Like in terms of merit. It's merit, isn't it, to think that thought? Because it means that every time you have a thought, say, that's unskillful or harmful, you want to harm someone in some way or other, and then you have this memory. What did Damrivi Varado say? I'm not me say, I'm just passing this through from the Buddha, before Brahman. What did the Buddha say? He said, all beings must not be harmed. Couldn't be easier, could it? As a meditation, as a thought. When you get into an argument with someone, when you go in a traffic jam, when you're angry with someone, you can have that lovely thought, and it will save you a lot of trouble, and it will save you a lot of suffering. And in some ways it encapsulates Buddhism in an incredible way. I mean, I think that's, like, very often the practice is one of just continual reminding. I mean, we have our habits, which we just keep dragging us back. Not just our own habits, but the habits of society which we pick up. The people that we live with, we pick up their habits. We pick up their thoughts. This is the problem of living with other human beings. Is very often I think your thoughts and you think my thoughts in a way. It's just the nature of relationship. You begin to think the same even. And that can be skillful or unskillful. But maybe I think without Kalyana Mitta like the Buddha, I think generally human thought tends to be degrading. It tends to spiral downwards. Me versus you, me getting what I want, and so on. And what this thought does is it's elevating, it's not degrading. As long as I think that thought, then I'm working against all my habits, and I'm working against your habits too. You understand? And it's kind of like metta in a way. Like with metta, remember the first session I did with you? I used this phrase, may you be well. May we be well. It's like that. It's like that. It's like metta this, but it's a slightly different way of saying it. All beings must not be harmed. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't feel aggression, actually, but it allows your aggression to rest. It allows your aggression somewhere to rest, doesn't it? It's like a solid rock. The aggression comes like a wave and it hits the rock and the rock does not move. That's the end of that wave, isn't it? There's a kind of fearlessness in that, isn't it? Like with aggression and anger, it can be a sort of fear in it. Like if you allowed that to act, that would be very harmful, wouldn't it? Very harmful for you. And sometimes you can't even stop it. Even if you see it's anger and hatred and ill will is danger and harmful, you've got no way of stopping it. Because it's there, you can't. How do you stop this force, you want to suppress it and think, I'm a Buddhist, this is wrong, this is evil, it's impermanent, it's not me, it's not mine. But what does it do? It's still there. What are you going to do with it? It's just waiting for a moment to burst. Right? So it makes you feel unsafe, doesn't it, thought? You're not safe because there's nowhere for that thing to hit, no rock. But now you've got a rock. All beings must not be harmed. All must be. You can think what you like. Think what you like. Don't think what you like. Allowing thoughts, that's not it. But thoughts arise in the mind. Thoughts of fear, worry, all kinds of greed, lust, like that. Lust can be very harmful, actually, can't it? A lot of harm can come from it, and justify it for various reasons. We can justify our harmful conduct, but this phrase is kind of immovable, isn't it? You can't move it. All beings must not be harmed. Incredible. That's a summary. It's an incredible summary, isn't it? If you want to remember the Pali, you can have it. I found that very lovely. It's like a lovely mantra to keep in your mind, actually. Just say that over and over again. It's very, very beautiful. All beings must not be harmed. 6 words. Incredible. You wouldn't think that Brahman truth could be encapsulated into 6 words. So effective. So effective. And in realizing, then the Buddha says, in speaking that and so on, and then in realizing the truth of these sayings, the 9 of them, I only gave you the first one, he, the Brahmin, the monk, you, is bent on the practice of mercy and tenderness for all living beings. So, like that lovely saying, I have to kind of, just to come back, Madhu Pindaka, we're talking about if they found nothing to engage with. Like in thinking that thought, you're not engaging with anger, are you? You're not engaging with it, you allow anger, but it's no engagement there. There's no energy going into the anger, no energy being added to the anger. And the anger's been allowed to cease in its own time, isn't it? The energy is allowed to dissipate. So there's no fear, there's a sort of fearlessness there, even with thought, in that you now have a rock, and then this energy can dissipate in its own time through the right practice. All beings must not be harmed. Incredible. So I find I was thinking like, one of the aspects of the Buddha's teaching is he said in the Parinibbana Sutta shortly before his death that Ananda was wanting, tell us just tell us something important. What is, you're about to die, we want to, is that kind of want to just say something that, and then the Buddha said, there is no closed fist with the Buddha's teaching. There's no secret there. Very often, like human society and management, often it's very secret, isn't it? There's a lot of sort of secret societies and secret detective services and all very secret what's going on. You never really know what's going on. What's going on? Are they, what are they planning? Secret. You just don't know. You can feel very insecure. What's secret? And read in the newspaper, and often they're pretty much secret. Really, they're not going to tell you the secrets, are they? But what is so incredible about the Buddha's teaching is that actually you don't need to know the secrets at all. It doesn't matter. They can keep it all secret if they want. It's fine, no problem at all. It can all be secret. Don't need to tell you anything. Because The main thing that's not secret is the Buddha's teaching. It's there, it's available, and it's completely true. And it's true actually for you, and it's true for all the secret services and people out to get you actually, this Brahmin truth, all beings must not be harmed. It's true for them and it's true for you. Alright, that's a sort of truth, because it's a Brahmin truth. It's not like, so that's amazing, isn't it? Like how universal that is and how you can extend it and how it breaks through all the sort of secrets that go on, the sort of secrecy of human thought. You know, I think people, there's a sort of feeling of superiority if you know a secret. I know a state secret. I know the state secret. Wow, that's incredible. So power that must come from knowing a secret. I know something very, very important, very secret. I'm one of the few people in the world who knows the secret. So, that's very good. But this is true for you. All beings must not be harmed. And that's not secret. The only thing is to apply it and to remember it. I could keep the rest of these Brahmin truths secret and taunt you. Say, next one, I'll give you the next one next week. Or say next month. That would be good actually, a good exercise for you. It would force you to look in the Anguttara Nikaya and find out what the rest were. Well, that's very good. So there's only 9 more to go, only 8 more to go. Well, the other one's quite good too, actually. But the first one is very good. It's not to be underestimated. The second one is Sabbe Kamma Anichati. 3 words. I think the Brahmin truths all begin with the word Sabbe. Or they all have the word Sabbe, and it's quite universal like that. That's why they say all beings must not be harmed. How about one? There must be one person I'd really like to harm. Just give me one excuse, just one exception. No exception, Sabbe. And then the other one is Sabbe Kamma Anicca, all sense pleasures. The word Anicca, sometimes impermanence. If you allow me, I'll translate it as illusion. Explained that a bit last week. All sense pleasure is illusion. Sabbe Kamma Dukkati, all sense pleasure is unfulfilling. Sabbe Kamma Viparinama Dhammati, all sense pleasure is subject to alteration. Sabbe Bhava Aniccati, every state of existence is illusion. Sabbe Bhava Dukkati, every state of existence is unfulfilling. Sabbe Bhava Viparinama Dhammati, every state of existence is subject to alteration. Naham Kvachani Katsachi Kinchana Tasmin, I am nowhere part of anything. Na Chamama Kvachani Kisminchi Kincha Tatati, nowhere is there anything that is mine. So each of those 9, now you have to remember all of these. You're the meditation society of Colombo. We are the English meditation group of Colombo. And you want some meditations? Well, you've had a mouthful and a half today, and that's 9 for you to remember. And just remember one is very good. When you feel very full of greed for someone, then you can say, all sense pleasure is illusion. All sense pleasure is illusion, like that. So you'll have to work out how to do this. Every state of existence is unfulfilling. If you get jealous, you want to be a very important person, you can do so if you want. But remember that every state of existence is illusion. Every state of existence is unfulfilling. Every state of existence is subject to alteration. Very incredible. And I am nowhere part of anything. That's one. I put that as separate from the other one. The next one, the last one. I am nowhere part of anything. When you think that you're a very important person, or you're very attached to all your lovely possessions and etc., you can use this very lovely thought to say, reflect, and nowhere is there anything that is mine. My body, my thoughts, my degree, my views, my opinions, my relationships, my society, my world, nowhere is there anything that is mine. In so saying, he speaks truth, not falsehood. Incredible. He presumes not, I am superior, I am equal, I am inferior. And in realizing the truth of these sayings, he is bent on the practice of mercy and tenderness for all living beings. He is bent on turning away from sense pleasure. He is bent on ending greed for sense pleasure. He is bent on ending attachment to sense pleasure. He is bent on turning away from states of existence. He is bent on ending greed for states of existence. He is bent on ending attachment to states of existence. He is bent on the practice of having nothing at all.